I have been married for 6 years, and until recent events, I thought that my wife and I had a great relationship. We both worked and devoted time to our careers. We had a good income for two, which allowed us to live practically without denying ourselves anything. But my rosy life ended when I accidentally got into my faithful wife's laptop and found out what I would never have known. I feel guilty for what happened. It seems to me that if it weren't for my actions, everything would be fine, but no one knows how it would really be. The beginning of the year always brought with it a sense of new beginnings, and as an inevitable consequence, the payment of taxes. This year, I decided to approach the matter with particular responsibility, as the financial well-being of our small family has always been my top priority. Nicole, my wife, usually did not interfere in these matters, preferring to work on her projects. But this time, I needed her help. Nicole, I need your income and expenses for the last year to include them in our tax return, I told her one spring evening as we settled in the living room with cups of tea. She nodded, busy watching some series on her tablet, and seemed to not take my words too seriously. A few days later, when I reminded her about it again, she sighed and said she would prepare everything soon. But time passed, and there was no data from her. My anxiety about the tax payment deadlines grew with each day, yet Nicole continued to postpone this moment, which was unlike her. One day, when she went out to the store for groceries, I couldn't stand it and decided to check her laptop for any financial information. I knew it was an invasion of her personal space, but my concern about the tax return deadlines outweighed this. The laptop was not locked, and notifications from some messenger were flashing on the screen. I was about to close them and start looking for spreadsheets or documents with financial data when the name of the sender caught my attention. Patrick Lane. The messages were personal, and I realized that I was facing something more than just forgotten financial reports. I could not imagine that my wife, whom I loved and trusted more than anything in the world, could behave in this way. My heart stopped, and my hands trembled as I began to read the correspondence. Patrick Lane had been pestering my wife for at least 2 weeks, writing her love letters, and asking for a meeting to have sex. As it seemed to me, Nicole simply kept the conversation going with him, and nothing more, always refusing to meet with him. But it infuriated me that this guy was writing to my wife. The day after the discovery, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. Nicole had already gone to work, and I decided to seek more information. I turned on the computer and began searching for information about Patrick Lane. My fingers flew over the keyboard, entering queries into the search engine until I found his social media profile. Looking at his photos, I tried to see in him the person who was ready to destroy my marriage. But what I saw was just an ordinary man, perhaps even handsome, with a confident smile and eyes, in which I searched for signs of malice. In one of the photos, I recognized a man who lived in the neighboring house, our neighbor, whom I had seen drive his old Ford numerous times. I realized that I needed to act cautiously. If Nicole found out about my suspicions too early, she could deny everything and destroy all the evidence. I had to be sure that my wife could not be unfaithful to me. The first thing I decided was to discuss the situation with someone I trusted. Carl had been my best friend since childhood, someone who always supported me in tough times. I called him, and we agreed to meet at a bar in the evening so I could tell him everything. When I entered the bar, Carl was already waiting for me at a table in the corner. His face showed concern, indicating he felt the weight of my mood. "What happened, buddy?" he said as I sat down opposite him. I sighed and began to tell my story. The words poured out of me about Nicole's correspondence with Patrick. Carl listened attentively, nodding in understanding and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he was silent for a few minutes, staring into his glass. Then he looked up at me and said, "We'll find a way out. You're not alone in this." We discussed possible courses of action, from confronting Nicole directly to dealing with the neighbor who had crossed the line. But one thing was clear. I couldn't just sit back because my marriage was directly threatened. There was no actual infidelity yet, but I feared it might happen soon if this neighbor didn't calm down and stay away from my wife. Though I was confident in Nicole, something still kept me restless. Carl promised to support me, regardless of my decision. But before taking the next step, I needed to think everything through carefully. The following day, I embarked on an investigation. Using social media and some online resources, I gathered information about Patrick. He worked in the marketing department of some company. At first glance, nothing special. A middle-aged man passionate about sports and traveling. It was obvious from him that he was the kind of man who enjoyed the attention of women and made no effort to hide it. I decided to create a fake female social media profile. I first liked his photo, and within just 10 minutes he messaged me first. "Hi, want to get acquainted?" And from there, it began. I communicated with him under the guise of a woman, and he readily believed me. To make it more convincing, the next day while I was at work, I asked a young intern to record a voice message for Patrick saying, "I miss you already, kitty." After a few days of communication, Patrick, as I had suspected, became more open. He shared his thoughts, future plans, and he asked for some intimate photos. However, I quickly dodged the situation by writing, "Oh, we hardly know each other. How about we meet in person? What do you think?" "Dan, I like that idea. Let's meet in a couple of days at some luxurious motel. I'll let you know the exact date, okay?" I proposed from the fake profile, and was in a quandary because I could now confront Patrick. But what about my wife? Technically, she hadn't cheated on me. But what if I hadn't discovered the correspondence? I needed a better plan. I wanted to be sure whether my wife could cheat on me. All this time I was checking my wife's laptop. Patrick continued writing to her, though not as persistently. He apparently got distracted by me under the guise of a woman and lost interest in Nicole. Then a crazy yet seemingly sensible idea came to me. I wrote to Patrick from the fake profile, "Baby, do you remember our upcoming meeting? I was wondering if you have a girlfriend. I've been wanting to try something new for a long time." Patrick saw the message and didn't write anything for about 5 minutes. He was evidently shocked. "I don't know. I have one, but I'm not sure if she'd agree." He wrote, and I hoped he was referring to Nicole. I asked him to find out from her, and he wrote that he would try. About 20 minutes later, I saw my wife pause her movie watching and open her laptop. We were sitting in the living room, and I realized that she was probably communicating with Patrick. I looked at her and believed that she wouldn't make a foolish mistake. At the same time, I felt terrible about what I was doing. This cat and mouse game, secrecy, and deceit were so far from the person I considered myself to be. 10 minutes later, Nicole put away her laptop and continued watching the movie, but Patrick never wrote to me. I thought my wife had rebuffed him, and we went to bed. The next morning, I checked my fake account and saw one notification from Patrick. Opening the message, I was shocked. She agreed and is interested in when the meeting will take place. Oh, that's great news. What's her name? I tried to find out the names because I couldn't believe my wife would agree to such a thing. Nicole, she's my neighbor, a nice girl. So when is it convenient for you to meet? And my worst fears came true. Nicole agreed to meet at a hotel with our neighbor and the unknown girl, who I was pretending to be. How foolish. Knowing Nicole had the day off tomorrow, I wrote to Patrick that we could meet at the motel at 5 o'clock in the evening and sent him the address. He said he would check with Nicole, and 10 minutes later I got a positive response that everything was on. Damn. I called Carl and shared the latest news. He was just as shocked as I was. He suggested catching them red-handed the next day, and I agreed. We decided to meet in the morning and wait for the evening while I would tell Nicole that I would be at work. But what intrigued me most was how Nicole would justify her trip tomorrow. Nicole came home at her usual time and started complaining about her job. Imagine, I have to go to work again tomorrow because Lori got sick. I really wanted to rest tomorrow. Oh, how unexpected. So you'll be at work all day tomorrow? Yeah, maybe even later than usual. Listening to her, I realized she was lying to me. It's a shame, of course, but I'll also be a bit late tomorrow, so no worries. Nicole had made up an alibi, which meant she was definitely going to the motel meeting, and this infuriated me. Now I understood that I had to punish not only Patrick, but also Nicole. After much contemplation and preparation, X day had arrived. That morning I felt odd. Inside, fear and excitement raged, mixing with resentment and anger. Carl picked me up exactly on time. His look conveyed support and readiness to assist in any situation. "Ready?" he asked as I got into the car. I nodded, though deep down I doubted. But it was too late to back out. Upon arriving at the location, we positioned ourselves near the entrance to the motel, trying to remain inconspicuous. We sat in a cafe until the evening, discussing our plan of action. My pulse quickened when I saw Patrick driving up to the motel. He got out of the car and looked around, as if searching for someone. "There's our guy," Carl whispered quietly, preparing for action. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. After waiting a few minutes to ensure Patrick had entered his room, I took everything necessary and headed to his door. Each step seemed like an eternity. When I reached the door, my hands were shaking. I knocked. The door opened, and I saw Patrick. His face showed surprise, seeing me instead of an internet girlfriend and Nicole. "Hello, Patrick. We need to have a talk," I said, trying to sound confident and calm. He tried to say something, but Carl, following me in, closed the door, leaving the three of us inside. His face froze in bewilderment and fear. "What does this mean?" "You guys shouldn't be here," Patrick said, trying to remain calm. I, feeling the inner anger and resentment rising in you, began to speak. "Did you think you could play with other people's feelings and go unpunished? Did you think you could destroy my family and just walk away?" My words came out firmer than I expected. Patrick stepped back, trying to understand the situation. Carl stood by the door, ensuring Patrick couldn't easily leave. "Or are you trying to say you don't recognize me?" "Dude, I'm seeing you for the first time. Who are we even talking about?" "Stop playing the fool. We're talking about Nicole," I said, my tone now raised. "Listen, I didn't know she was married. She didn't tell me anything about you." Patrick began to justify himself, his voice trembling with fear and confusion. "Don't lie to my face," I sharply interrupted him. "I've seen your correspondence. You knew who she was and what she means to me, and yet you kept writing to her and persuading her to meet." We stood face to face, and I could see him trying to find a way out of this situation, but I was determined to see this through. I had to defend my dignity and show that such actions have consequences. "Dude, in any case, she's not here, as you see. She's about 10 minutes late, which means she wasn't planning to come here at all," he said like a cornered puppy. "Don't you talk your way out of this." I couldn't hold back and hit him in the face. "What are you doing? For what?" he began to say hysterically. "Oh, so you're a girl now, huh?" I delivered a second blow. "Dude, stop. I'm seriously not guilty of anything," Patrick pleaded. "Seriously, writing to married women and offering them sex is not a big deal," I said, and Patrick received a third blow. "Stop, stop. I recognize you. You're that crazy." He didn't finish his sentence when another hit landed, and he fell to the floor. "Weakling, who can't stand by his words," I said, and began to wipe my hands with a napkin. Carl started to applaud me, saying it was wonderful, when suddenly someone knocked on the hotel room door. I opened the door and saw Nicole standing there, in makeup and a short skirt. "What are you doing here?" "No, darling. Better explain what you are doing here." It was clear she was in slight confusion. She walked inside and saw Patrick lying on the floor, who had suffered from my hands. She didn't say a word and began to cry. I was trying to understand why she was crying, whether it was because she was caught off guard or because she didn't get a call to sleep with another man. Patrick woke up and immediately ran out of the room, exclaiming, "Crazy," leaving me unsure of what to do. I hugged Nicole and realized I still loved her, but I couldn't shake off the thought that she was ready to betray me. I decided we needed to go home and talk it over. I thanked Carl for his help, and Nicole and I headed home. We had a difficult conversation where Nicole shared everything that happened. Patrick had started messaging her, and at first she rejected him, enjoying the attention and being unavailable to him. However, at some point, Patrick distanced himself and stopped messaging her, which upset her. After a while, he messaged her again, suggesting they meet, and she couldn't refuse and fell for the deception. Listening to all this, I was at a loss. I tried to understand Nicole, but it was hard, almost impossible. How could one understand such a thing? I made a decision and tried to forgive her, but everything had fundamentally changed. Days passed, and thoughts of our conversation with Nicole still haunted me. Every word she said, every tear she shed stayed with me like a heavy burden. Despite the pain and disappointment, I felt the need to find a way out of this labyrinth of feelings we had created for ourselves. Several weeks after our talk, we both immersed ourselves in work, trying to avoid long conversations about our future. It was a kind of silent agreement to give each other time and space to reflect. But as more time passed, it became clear that we couldn't continue living this way. One evening, as Nicole was asleep, I sat in the living room, flipping through old photos. Each smile, every happy moment captured in these pictures reminded me of how much we had gone through together. But now, looking at these photos, I realized I couldn't go back to the way things were. Too much had changed. The next day, I decided it was time to act. After work, I stopped at the park where Nicole and I used to walk at the beginning of our relationship. Sitting on a bench and watching the golden sunset, I realized that my mind had already made the decision I had been dreading. It was necessary to talk to Nicole openly and honestly, like never before. When I returned home, Nicole was waiting for me with dinner. Seeing her smile, I momentarily forgot about my decision. But then I remembered the weight that had been pressing on my shoulders for so long. "Nicole, we need to talk," I began after we finished dinner. Her smile faded, and she nodded, understanding the seriousness of the moment. I've thought a lot about us, about everything that has happened. And although this is one of the hardest decisions in my life, I feel that it's better for us to file for divorce. My words sounded firm, but inside everything was pounding. Nicole remained silent, taking deep breaths. I knew this day might come. "I just wanted you to know I truly regret my mistakes." Her voice trembled. "I regret it too," I replied. "I regret that we couldn't overcome this together. But I also understand that sometimes it's better to let go so both can move on." The conversation was long and difficult. We discussed the practical aspects of our future separation, but spent most of the time reminiscing about the good moments we had shared together. It felt like a farewell, sad but necessary. It was extremely difficult for me to come to terms with the idea that my wife was ready to commit treason, so my trust in her was gone. She explained her act as a temporary weakness, but agreed with me that this should not happen in a healthy marriage. She admitted that if I had not been in the room that day, she would have cheated on me. It all upset me, but nothing can be changed. When Nicole stood up to go to the bedroom, she turned and looked at me. In her eyes, I saw the same pain I felt. "Thank you for everything," she said quietly. After that night, when Nicole and I decided on the divorce, each day seemed like a trial. We continued living under the same roof, but as strangers, trying not to cross paths in the common areas of the house. It was strange and painful at the same time. To see the person with whom you've shared life for many years and realize that everything that once united you is now just a memory. I began preparing the divorce papers, consulting with a lawyer who helped me understand the legal aspects of the process. Each meeting with him reminded me of the reality of my situation, that I would soon officially be a divorced man. It wasn't easy to accept, despite all the hurt and disappointment I had experienced. Alongside this, I began to reevaluate my life. Dealing with infidelity and the subsequent breakup made me reflect on what truly matters to me and what values are priorities. I spent long evenings in contemplation, sometimes jotting down my thoughts in a notebook that became a sort of diary of my reassessment. One of those evenings, I realized that I didn't want bitterness and disappointment to define my outlook on life. I started looking for ways to rebuild myself, my inner world. Engaging in sports, revisiting a long-forgotten hobby, reading books that had been gathering dust on the shelf. All of this helped me feel better, gave me a sense of moving forward to a new life. I also decided to refresh my social circle, meeting with friends who supported me during the tough times, attending events and volunteering. All of this gave me a sense of belonging to life, helped me not to dwell on my problems. When the day to file for divorce arrived, I felt a strange sense of relief, not because I was happy about the end of our marriage with Nicole, but because I understood that it was a necessary step towards a new chapter in my life. We both deserved a chance at happiness, even if that happiness now appeared to us in different forms. The divorce went smoothly. We both tried to avoid unnecessary emotions, understanding that everything said and experienced could not be changed. At our last meeting, Nicole wished me happiness. I wished her the same. Despite everything, I sincerely wished her only well. Now, with everything behind me, I feel ready to start over. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I am sure of one thing. I can face any challenges that life throws at me, and I will find my happiness in whatever form it may come. Patrick, the cause of our unhappiness, turned out to be a coward and could not answer for his actions. I repeatedly went to his house and knocked on his door, but he did not open, and later I learned that he had moved away, which I found amusing. Looking out the window at the sunset, I realized that life goes on, and I am ready to meet it, open to new opportunities, new relationships, and new joys. After all, every end is always the beginning of something new. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.